architecture, hospitality skills, right? Developing all this, working with the operator, the client, having this big leadership role. To be perfectly honest, my next step wasn't leveraging those tools to the maximum, right? Because there just wasn't that many opportunities, for that at that particular time. Collaboration. When you say collaboration, like for me nowadays, when I hear collaboration, and then I see these kind of like very sort of standoffish, your court, my court, we're collaborating, but we're not really collaborating, are we? But that was collaboration, all in the same room. Engineer going to the subcontractor actually going, no, what, this could be better. Do it this way, and it was just great.
It's competition, and it's new generation. And they think absolutely different than what it used to be, right?
There's a lot of ego in architecture to create aesthetics and images and, architectural gestures that are sort of architecture's sake. But I think when you start to think about wellness, you have to put the human experience first and those kind of touch points and one-to-one, put ego aside and just have more empathy.
Hi, Shad. How are you?
Hi, Valeria. I'm good. How are you doing?
How was your stressful week?
My week was... Guys, can we talk about the traffic in Dubai at the moment?
Yeah, the traffic is mad.
I think everyone is stressed at the moment.
Yeah, that's why you're always late. Am I allowed to say that? But yeah, you're always late.
Yeah, I'm always late.
It's okay.
I'm not late to projects and to other things, but...
good you said it out loud in front of all the
well, I have
listeners
to cover up a little bit. It's not an excuse, but
it's been a bit crazy in the past year.
Yeah.
And today we have a really interesting guest, acclaimed architect in UAE, David Lessard, who specializes in hospitality, wellness. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing.
Thank you for coming.
Here.
Very exciting. And I have to admit, this is my very first, well, not very first, but I suppose first podcast with cameras rolling. I've done a little bit of podcasting. Do you call it podcasting?
Yeah.
Podcasters do podcasting. So did a little bit, but admittedly, this is kind of new territory for me. So I'm very excited that you guys are having
They're
me.
Our friends. Everyone that's watching, everyone. You guys look amazing.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
So we are coordinated today.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes, and I tried to match the decor. Well,
You always look, you always have a great style.
Yeah.
I always see that in all of the pictures
Always
and
looking
everywhere you
sharp.
go. It's always a well-dressed David that we have.
Well, thank you very much. I do kind of subscribe to that ethos that dressing is a form of respect, in a way. And I've always sort of subscribed, to that, even from a very young age, to be perfectly honest. I think I might have voted best dressed in high school.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And
Tell us how you ended up in this field. How did you end up in design and architecture?
One would like to think it's a very poetic story born out of creativity with a parent that's an artist and a dad that's a professor. But to be honest, it couldn't be any more opposite than that. I sort of stumbled into architecture and design. I come from very humble background, very humble beginnings, kind of working middle-class family in Brooklyn, New York in the 80s, right? So not a very glamorous time. And at the time, Brooklyn was not a very glamorous place. So, my path in the early years was just kind of following opportunities wherever they presented themselves. Yeah. And fast forward to high school, so kind of, teenage years, let's say. I actually had no ambition to go to university. And, this statement as well surprises people. Everyone's like, surely you came from a certain background in a certain place. And surely, you always had plans to go to university. Well, again, it couldn't be any more the opposite. My plan was actually to go to a vocational high school to learn a trade.
Okay.
What trade did you want to learn?
Well, this is even funnier. So computer repair. Because the future is computers and everyone will have a computer and those computers need to be fixed by someone, right? So fast forward to today, you just buy a new device when it breaks. So good thing I didn't pursue that career path. But computer repair was one vocation that I tested during these high school years. Electrical, automotive, I went through the whole gamut. And drafting, mechanical drafting was actually one of the courses they offered. And again, not in very poetically, but I selected that course not because I was particularly enamored by the trade. It was because of the people that were in the class, my friends, chose to go into drafting. So I kind of followed them into that and then just went with the flow, so to speak. But then 2 years into what was ultimately a 4-year curriculum, I did start to develop some technical skills. Found I could draw, found I could model. The time they were introducing one of the first versions of AutoCAD, and I showed some proficiency, for the software and interest in it. And then got some exposure to kind of the life of architecture beyond the walls of our very humble working class high school. At this point was on Staten Island, by the way, not in Brooklyn, New York, which is another story all in itself. And so I think once I got a little bit of a taste of what architecture was like beyond, just this vocation, and it was a much wider academic field with a lot, more reach in terms of like cultural impact and, and aesthetics and these sort of tangential design things. I said, oh, well, this is all kind of pretty cool. And I think what sort of tied the bow on top of it for me was doing a summer course at Pratt Institute, which is ultimately the university I went to. Mm-hmm. But even going to Pratt was a story in of itself, because still, even towards the end of high school, my ambition to go to university was still moderate at best. Yeah. I still wasn't over the moon by it, and I was still, I could probably just go to work, maybe, I guess as the easiest path. But that experience at Pratt said, okay, I will apply. And Pratt was actually the only university I applied to. I didn't apply to any other university. I applied to no safety schools whatsoever. So in some ways, my acceptance into Pratt was like the single point of whether or not I was going to be an architect professionally, because if I didn't get accepted, I probably would have just done something else, Yeah. Let's say my drive wasn't, what it is today then. And so, I probably just would have given up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, step by step after that was all, again, just sort of going with the flow and seeking the opportunity. When in Pratt, I somehow was actually a little bit ahead of my peers and colleagues and other student body, because most didn't do vocational training in high school. So I was coming into university with technical skills. I was able to draw. I was able to draw on the computer. I was already modeling in 3D Max, by that point. Wow. So I was light years ahead of people. I was not nearly as creative, not nearly as abstract in my thinking or poetic or academic, but I knew the tools.
Right.
Yeah. And
which
I approached
is very important in our field.
Which is very important in our field, and I have come full circle to appreciate that time, because to be perfectly honest, during that time I was very insecure about myself, because you would see these other people presenting and they were just so poetic and so knowledgeable and so deep in their understanding about tectonics and modernism and all of that, and like I didn't know who any of these things were, because they were coming from liberal arts backgrounds and I was coming again from a technical background. So in a way, I felt, like I was just the dumb tool in a way. But as you say, years later, you come to appreciate that somehow creativity can be learned, and if you observe and you know the tools and you know the craft, but you observe, and if you just are relentless in your kind of pursuit or reevaluation or assessment, do it again, try again. You can grow into a creative role. Yeah. And that is somehow reflected in my career now, because I can look at my career trajectory, which started, as I say, very much in the tools and very much from a technical background. And that's how it started even professionally, through the years. I'm a design director now, but if you would ask some of my first employers, who just also happened to be very notable architects in the world,
US as well,
which was back in the US. Mm-hmm. If you would have said of the studio of 50 people who to be a future design director, I think I would have been 48th, on the list of those people.
We've all been there.
For sure.
Yeah, but I was really low down that list. So no, I definitely have a kind of firmer appreciation of that kind of path. And it's not until you get to this kind of age as well that you reflect on these like moments of singularity, these kind of make or break moments, which at the time just seemed so inconsequential, to me. I decided on applying to Pratt like I decided what to eat for dinner, that night. But the gravity of those things in retrospect, probably had
and this gravity brought
meaning.
you to UAE. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think like some, I guess nowadays, people have a plan to come here. You speak to anyone around the world now in 2024, and, there's not, if you name the top 3 places you want to be as a designer or architect, Dubai is very high on that list sometimes first. But in 2008 wasn't quite the case. I started my career in New York. I was working for a firm in New York at the time. There were boom years, I graduated in 2005. Arguably, it was, if you think about even what this place was in 2005, it was really the kind of peak of development.
Different.
Dubai Marina, downtown, it was all under development and being.
But did you hear about it from New York?
Not at all.
No,
not at all.
Not at all.
No, certainly media and communication,
you didn't plan to end up here. You didn't apply. You didn't.
Yeah. No, not at all.
Because also at this period, it was also the development of the Palm, no?
Yes, that's absolutely right.
And there was a lot of involvement from US, not only with artists and but also architects. Was a lot of them was involved from the US. So
that's right. So what brought me here was a project in Abu Dhabi. We were invited as a firm based in New York to do a design competition for what is ultimately now, I guess it's the W Hotel on Yas Island.
Okay.
So it's the hotel that goes over the Formula One racetrack. Yeah. And we got the nod to do the design competition. True to my description about my path to this point, I was not part of the design team for the competition. It was like heavy hitter, creatives. And I was working on another project in the office at the time that was in the delivery stage, condominium project in New York, which is also very nice, by the way. And fast forward to, at the time was December 2007. And they had won the design competition against some pretty credible design competitors. Herzog and Demeron, Zaha Hadid were all competing for that project at the time. And we won. And one of the conditions of winning that project was that the team needed to be on site. You still have some of this, even nowadays, but back then you really had to be, the team had to be here and you had to be on site. You couldn't do things remotely. It was just happening too fast. And too fast, just to give you some context, it's a 500 key hotel, roughly 40,000 square meters, for those listening, and that 2 hotels kind of know generally the scale and how long those things take. But we had 18 months for design plus construction. Yeah.
Wow.
So these types of projects typically take, 36 months to build, and a project of that complexity. So again, if you or your listeners don't know the W in Abu Dhabi, Google it to see the complexity of that, because it's not a simple up and down
it's not a
tower.
Simple project.
How did you guys manage that?
Well, a lot of effort and a lot of money, simply put. I could talk about that, for a few minutes, because it is kind of worth it, because I think some of those lessons are still applicable today. And a lot of times that we speak to clients, back then the mentality was, there are no limits, to what we do. Here we are 15 years later, and, the region has adapted and evolved, absolutely. And, you have to be sensible, right? And the world has changed. But then, the ethos was get it done by any means. And any means was hire the best and the brightest people, get them to commit 100% of their time to the project. Yeah. So not the best and the brightest sometimes that comes in and out of meetings, but best and the brightest. You sit there and I'm going to sit there and you're going to work on this the whole time.
And we'll make it happen.
So that's from the design side, and that's assembling engineers like Schleibergerman and Arup, and working with fabricators like Central Stahl in Amsterdam who build yachts. So actually the link bridge that goes over is actually a yacht turned upside down, basically, and was built in 6 pieces and, taken by sea. All the way to from the Netherlands to Abu Dhabi. So it's those kind of things. Working with a tier 1 main contractor on a cost plus basis. So
right, it's not just whatever project, it's a complex.
That's right. It was an absolute complex project. And, so it wasn't like get 3 quotes. And no, it was a client that hand selected the best and the brightest in all their fields, the best contractors, the best subcontractors. And again, cost plus, meaning open book, no price, you quotes for whatever material you procure. You have a markup, of course. Everyone needs to make a profit. You show us what that is. We sign it. We go.
Wow.
And
but that's
it is
cherry on top.
It is just, but it is the kind of quintessential definition. I still haven't experienced anything like this in my career to this point. Collaboration. When you say collaboration, like for me nowadays, when I hear collaboration, and then I see these kind of like very sort of standoffish, your court, my court,
right,
we're collaborating, but we're not really collaborating, are we? But that was collaboration, all in the same room. Engineer going to the subcontractor actually going, no, what, this could be better. Do it this way. And it was just great. And if you want to talk about trial by fire or sink or swim, I at the time was 25 years old, and I was the project architect on that project. And I had a very substantial role, on that project. And I was way out of my depth with all these experts around me, all these guys with
a great way to
gray hair and, and just building for 30 years. And here I am in the room, like just trying to do one thing. And my mission, my mission statement from my firm in New York was just maintain design integrity. It's all happening very fast. There are a lot of people involved. The design vision is this, and you, David, are responsible for maintaining that vision.
How many people from your team from US came down to
70?
70.
70.
70.
70. The peak of our team size in Abu Dhabi at the time, just architectural design was 70 people. Yeah.
Wow.
We were collaborating at the time with Tilke, architectural engineers out of Germany, with Diwan. They were a really important collaborator of ours. So I would say between, the Diwan team, the Tilke team, and the Asymptote team, who I was working with at the time, the principals Hani Rashid and Lisa Couture, who I owe a lot, to my career based on their trust in me and giving me, all this exposure and experience and ultimately shipping me out here.
I hope they're listening to this podcast.
Yes, exactly. If they do listen to it, thank you very, very much. I do consider them mentors, and I'm still in touch with them today, actually. And so, yes, between those 3 teams, yes. And if you start to add in the engineers and the contractor, we were hundreds of people in these porta cabins, in the middle of Yas Island, really making sketches and then going out maybe 2 weeks later and seeing it coming up. It was a really incredible experience.
That's crazy. So every time you go there now and you see the creation, what do you think? What goes through your
a lot of course it's very fond memories of that time. I was very young and had a lot more energy. I think if I had to do something like that today, there's no way. I barely agreed to do this podcast in the evening, so never mind the hours one had to work to get that project done. But no, very, very fond memories of it, and and the team as well. It was really, I think we were all very fortunate. The team, we got along really well, and a lot of like-minded individuals. So yes, I look back fondly on the time. I do look back on the project as well and somehow see it in contrast to what I'm doing today as well. It is a certain style of architecture that has a purpose and a place. It's very iconic, so to speak. And to be honest, that was the design brief for that project at that time.
But it's still really relevant. It's still such a nice
the brief for that project was, when the cameras are rolling, make sure they focus on this building, right? This was it. It was a signature piece in the middle of what was ultimately one of Abu Dhabi's first major milestones in sporting. And now look at today, Abu Dhabi sports are, incredible. Regional sports are incredible. So we were very, early and very fortunate to participate in that. But I do also reflect on that building and, and see a certain style and approach to architecture that, today, I probably wouldn't take, right? But, it wasn't a design direction that I was leading per se at that particular time. But I think learning projects of that complexity and that process and the kind of bespoke nature of the interiors and the customization of the facade, again, it gives you have all these technical tools, but then really ultimately impressive. how you apply these tools, sometimes can be a lot more, simplified or pared back.
So then later the road led you to Perkins.
That's right. There was actually a step in between Asymptote and Perkins and Will. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the context around why one changes at that time. This was 2009, 2010, in the shadow or wake of the global financial crisis. Let's just say there weren't so many options available at that particular time, you know. So again, the career decisions at that particular moment in my life, not so poetic. I would have loved to have gone back to New York. That was always the plan. I was, you know, in the very cliche way, I was on a 3-month contract, a 6-month contract, a 12-month, you know, and then, you know, here you are 16 years later.
And then you go back.
Yeah, it was still happening, yeah. So the principals in New York at the time said, well, you know, David, I don't know if you've been watching the news, but New York is on fire. Not physically, but like, you know, metaphorically. You know, the financial center of the world's just calamity at the time. So they're like, look, you're always welcome back, but we just don't know what the future is going to hold. And so at that point, I said, okay, submitted my resignation, and actually went to work for another New York-based practice, Raphael Vignoli Architects, who at the time were doing New York University in Abu Dhabi.
Yep.
And so as I was grooming myself for complex, iconic architecture, hospitality skills, right, developing all this, working with the operator, the client, having this big leadership role, to be perfectly honest, my next step wasn't leveraging those tools to the maximum, right? Because there just wasn't that many opportunities, you know, for that at that particular time. So New York University was still an amazing project. And it was, again, one with kind of longevity. You know, the W Hotel, or at the time was the Yas Hotel, it was very briefly a Viceroy. It was, again, one of those projects that I had to finish. So even though we saw a lot of projects around us stopping, it was like, no, F1 is coming. I mean, you know, this project has our full support. And so did New York University. So I just sort of followed that in a way. And again, I think just, you know, speaks to a little bit like to my character. You know, I wasn't overly ambitious, you know, in those years, you know. I was always a very good number 2. And that's why it's always very weird to me now that I'm a partner in a practice, you know, that always thought I'd be, you know, just a very, a very sturdy kind of, you know, 2IC, as they say, second in command. But yes, a brief stint at Raphael Vignoli. Well, brief stint. It was 3 or 4 years. And again, you know, mostly on site. You know, we're doing the design from Abu Dhabi. Same thing. You know, Vignoli shipped the team out to Abu Dhabi, doing the design, doing the construction at the same time simultaneously. I was working specifically on the Performing Arts Center, which, you know, had a lot of interesting complexity in of itself, technically speaking. And then, yes, Perkins and Will, I would say, was my first step towards really building roots here, you know, in the region.
Yeah.
Everything I had done before that was really a project-based role.
Right.
You know, and we, you know, as the teams anyway, never really saw ourselves as being here.
Yeah.
We were working for the New York practice, doing a project here, but we were traveling
like
back
quite
often. Yes. But the reality was, we were very much here. You know, I had an apartment. I, you know, met my, you know, now wife. So yeah, I did have roots, but I guess from a career point of view, and it wasn't until I stepped into a regional office, working on a multitude of projects, different typologies across the region, with a different mandate, you know, to grow and to make an impact. You know, in those previous roles, there was no mandate for growth or make an impact. It was just like, do your job, do it right, do it on time, and then come back, you know. Whereas the role in Perkins & Will was completely different. And I suppose this was around 2014, so it's 10 years ago now. And it reshaped, you know, how I looked, you know, at the region and how I thought of myself being here, you know, for the foreseeable.
So how many years has it been since you came at that point?
So
I'm just curious.
Yeah, at that point, it would have been 6 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
it took you a while.
So you've been here for
I was
some
there,
time before.
2008 to 2014. Still thinking about it.
Still thinking about when you're going back to
I don't know about this place, you know. I don't know. But the reality is, you know, I was thriving. You know, I was having a great time, doing great work, you know, earning a decent wage. Again, you know, great period with my then girlfriend, now wife, great group of friends, you know, and
still,
I don't know. It's
still a great group of friends, no?
Yeah. Yes. Again, the jury. I take a long time to decide.
Yeah?
So the jury is still
You're
out.
still thinking about
Yeah,
it.
the jury is still
David,
out.
another big part of obviously your life and that we cannot skip talking about would be H+A.
Of course, yes.
Tell us a little bit, when did all of that start, and how did it come
another 10 years?
How did it come? Are you sure about it?
This, that I have to say was one of the easier things to do. And there is a little context here behind this story as well. And it's going to be similarly almost as clunky as my career path, up to this point. Perkins & Will, as most people know now, the Dubai office, as we sit here today, is closed, and they're running most of their Middle East operations, I believe, out of their London office. But I've lost touch. I don't really know. But the Perkins & Will Dubai studio is one of the biggest offices globally. We were one of the best performing. We were having a really good run of it, let's say, and particularly in the area of hospitality and residential work, because as we all know, the UAE and the wider, GCC is really the epicenter of hospitality, residential, branded residential, and a lot of innovation, in this space as well. So we were really thriving, building a reputation, and me specifically, kind of building my skill set around these practice areas. So eventually I started as a senior architect in Perkins & Will, grew to director of hospitality.
And more focused on hospitality
and
from
more
your
focused on personally. And we had a lot of different practice areas within the group, including healthcare. And in Perkins & Will, Stas Luca, who is the founder and my partner in H+A, at the time was the director of operations in Perkins & Will. He was also the director of healthcare. And so between us, we were honing these skills and, working together, but not a huge amounts because we had our own kind of practice areas. But, we had a rapport and, we kind of spoke the same language. He grew up in London. I grew up in New York. He had a certain appreciation for the kind of style of architecture, so we had more of a personal relationship, I would say. And him as the ops director, me as a director of a practice area, we did have some interface, but generally speaking, it was just, we get on well. This is a cool guy, I'm a cool guy, and we kind of get on well. So as the Perkins & Will office started to move towards closing, step by step, people started to leave the practice. Stas left, I would say, about a year before me. And it was his idea to set up H+A. He is the founder. And the story of H+A, again, in kind of true style of just follow opportunity, the plan for H+A from the beginning versus what H+A is now is completely different. Stas set up H+A as a healthcare design studio. So spoiler alert, the H in H+A stands for healthcare.
Oh, I was actually going to ask that. What does it stand for? Because I never...
It stands for healthcare. So Stas set up H+A as healthcare and architecture.
Right.
So no ambition for hospitality, no ambition for interior design,
wellness,
no ambition for all of this. He saw the gap. It was his skill set, and he set up H+A as a healthcare design practice. And they started trading, and they had a few projects. And fast forward a few months later, after he had set up the company, my exit from Perkins & Will led me to do some soul searching. I had a kind of epiphany, as one does, epiphany as in I was forced to think about what to do next. And it just struck me at that point. I really felt like I was not at a peak. I mean, one likes to think that they have more to go, but I did feel like I was at a good place to consider setting up on my own. We were bidding loads of work. I was developing reputations with clients and operators, and particularly the operators, And the operators are the ones that actually gave me the most confidence, to be honest. And so as I was exiting Perkins & Will, I was making lots of phone calls and just kind of testing the water. It was a little bit of a prequel, so it wasn't me going and setting up and then making calls. It was like okay, if I did this, hypothetically speaking, because I also had to be very careful, with existing clients, right? And things that we were currently bidding and all of this. And there was really unanimous support. There was honestly not a single person I called, even clients I knew reasonably well that could give it to me straight. They were like, yeah, you have to. Like you really need to do this. So they gave me the confidence, and at that point I was thinking of options, set up. I always knew, or not always knew, but at the time I did have genuine project opportunities that I needed to start doing now. And so to do those projects now, you need infrastructure. You need something, the easiest thing to do is set up. And so I phoned, around a bunch of people who I had known with practices, a lot of peers and colleagues that we know. I won't mention their names because they all said no. But, in retrospect, it's fine. But
you're happy about that now, no?
One has to be. One actually has to be, yeah. And Stas and I connected. I forget even who, like, did I call him? He called me. It's a blur. But I do remember going out for a couple of drinks with him, and sort of hashing it out. And, I think after one or two meetings, he was like, come Monday, let's do this. Let's do this. And walking in the door of H+A as a partner, bringing hospitality, introducing interior design.
Right.
And, this wasn't coming in and reshaping. This was coming in and kind of adding, a very complementary piece to what ultimately was already an idea in Stas's mind to do healthcare in a unique way with more of a hospitality focus and feel, to think of the patient experience, more as the guest experience. And it just aligned perfectly with my skill set.
Yeah.
And we sort of crafted and honed this vision between healthcare and hospitality, architecture, interior design, the guest experience, the patient experience, overlapping in wellness. And this, from a very early stage, became the mission statement of H+A. And we were kind of relentless in approaching our healthcare projects with this hospitality ethos, and our hospitality projects with this kind of wellness
How
ethos.
do you define wellness in a hospitality context?
This is it's a very good question, and one has to be very careful. Nowadays I feel like wellness is what sustainability was, 10, 15 years ago. And now still to this day, we're still kind of greenwashing, things, saying things are sustainable,
and everything is wellness.
And everything is wellness, so one has to be careful in throwing that term around, but we like to believe that we practice wellness in the truer sense of the term, a little bit more cerebral, a little bit more academic, built on science and not necessarily built on trends or aesthetics.
Right.
And so what do we mean by that? Well, there are plenty of authors and books out there to describe, the principles of wellness design, how we interact, with those spaces, the physiological response, we have when we're in space, how cortisone is released in certain scenarios or serotonin is released in others.
Give us an example.
Well, the built environment can very much inspire these things. So for one example, sharp edges, faceted forms. Yeah. So let's say kind of more Daniel Libeskind, style of architecture, Berlin Museum, kind of like this kind of thing. Although we very much accept it and acknowledge it with our rational brain that this building is not going to hurt me and I can enter this building and have nothing happen to me. There is still that animal part of our brain, which is seeing these edges, and there's a certain awareness, right? It's a heightened sense of danger is an extreme word to use, but this, we do have different physiological reactions to sharp edges, hard corners, versus more organic forms and softer forms, yeah? We are still very animalistic, somehow in our perception of the built environment and react in those ways. I'll give you another example. If you're in a big square, we were talking about Milan, earlier, in the Duomo Plaza, let's say, most people don't take direct lines across plazas. Most people hug the edges. Yeah. Yeah. Because walking through a square makes you very exposed. And by being exposed, nowadays, what are we concerned about exposure? Not too much. But maybe 100,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago, whatever it was, we're scared a tiger will come and take us, from the middle of the plains. So how we tend to hug edges. So what does this mean? This means proportion in space. Yes, there's something really great about a grand quadruple height, entrance that is, 50 meters wide and 30 meters deep. But walking to the center of that with no one around you, you have a certain, inhibition to do this, versus spaces that are more intimately and proportionally scaled to you as the human. So I think when we talk about wellness in our projects, we talk a lot about scale, that kind of human scale or that human approach. I think there's a lot of ego in architecture to create aesthetics and images and, architectural gestures that are sort of architecture for architecture's sake. But I think when you start to think about wellness, you have to put the human experience first and those kind of touch points and one-to-one, put ego aside and just have more empathy on how one actually feels, in this space. Again, we appreciate as designers these very impactful, large-scale, glamorous spaces. Even I do as well. Of course. But I think, your question was specifically related to hospitality, and I would say for sports and commercial, maybe I have a different answer, but in hospitality, it's about this. And then there's, lots of things, beyond that as well. Of course, the palette of materials being natural, the increased fresh air, circulation in buildings to, just, help with better sleep and, productivity and all of these things.
Well, this topic, it's such a wide topic, actually.
Indeed,
right?
Yeah.
It's, we could talk about it probably like in 2 episodes. How do you see hospitality changed in the past years?
I would say, hospitality historically has not been very agile. One could argue that the layout of a hotel room, for the better, it's still very much the same today, but it is changing. And so if you ask what has changed, I think finally, operators have started to break out of the molds of kind of what was done before, breaking out of the mold of their brand standards, understanding that the world is changing very quickly and the way that we kind of consume media and our travel habits and all of this. And so operators are trying their best to be more agile. I think for the larger operators, it's more of a challenge, but I think that's why today you see such an emergence of the smaller operators, when you start to talk about the best hotels, in the world. I'm sure on people's top 10 list, there's some big players in there, but I'm sure a lot of us have a kind of boutique niche, kind of property in there.
We're talking a lot about Aman Hotel in this podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Aman are, we're world's leading. And but, I think this kind of agility allows them to speak more to the guests' needs a little bit quicker. And this is either through service, how they communicate, how guests interact, with the hotels through technology, the kind of concierge services, or if you don't want that, at the very top and you want, just more of a basic stay, these kind of select service, hotels offer you those opportunities as well. So the biggest change I would say is there. Breaking out of the brand standards, something as designers we've been dealing with for a long time. And I can honestly say for, this year especially, I won't say we're tearing up the book, but if you look at the work that we recently did for the Ritz-Carlton in Ras Al Khaimah,
which is a very nice project.
It's not exactly following the brand standard or the book of the Ritz-Carlton, and that wasn't easy to do during the time, because there was certainly, a desire or let's say let's say there was definitely some thinking that it should be more of a quote unquote Ritz-Carlton. But I think as the design developed, especially as things got on site, when people started to experience the space and really touch the palettes and see what they were, they said, you know what, this is not traditionally what a Ritz-Carlton is for us, but we actually think this is going to be super cool. And, just opened in March, but the feedback so far has been reasonable.
Feedback. We
Reasonable.
Definitely have to pass by.
And that I think, again, kind of shapes my view about, where hospitality is and where it's going. It's, I think a lot more confidence to break the molds. And it's almost like you kind of have to break your own molds nowadays because there's so much competition, right?
It's competition and it's new generation. and they think absolutely different than what it used to be, right? So
I want to dive a little bit deeper into the whole conversation, because I didn't have a chance to actually ask you how much inspiration, Brooklyn, you were talking about Brooklyn early on, and I would think that would be a big inspiration for you in today's work, and how much are you actually bringing from Brooklyn to what we see today out of the design? Is there any trends? Is there anything that you feel that this is the pathway for hospitality or for wellness? That
look, I mean, by the time I left Brooklyn, it was certainly emerging, and I would say, there was definitely, particularly in hospitality, and when we talk about hospitality in Brooklyn, it's not only hotels, but it's like restaurant and nightlife and all these types of things. It was very emergent and very avant-garde. It was certainly unapologetic in what it was trying to be and how they were trying to do it. Just embracing the kind of the kind of chaos of the urban fabric, as it were, and just leaning into that, completely. Not trying at any one point to, say, oh, this, we want this to be a fine dining restaurant, or we want this to be a luxury hotel, so therefore we need marble and we need tablecloths and all of these types of things. Again, I'm going back 15, 20 years, which now, of course, we know that this is just, there are no rules for what luxury is. But then it was a big question mark. It was a real, novel project to do the types of design and spaces, unapologetically urban, rustic, rough, very sort of utilitarian kind of approach to materials, and design, whilst servicing, the jet set, the kind of who's who. And then, I mean, of course, it's New York, okay, but New York is probably the same as Paris and London. You don't want to say New York is the best. I mean, someone being from New York saying New York is the best would be. But at that time, it really felt, and I was the first one to admit that, London at some point was very much the center of architecture and design. And that was
interesting.
And I would say that was slightly after, when I left, New York. I felt like things kind of moved, to London by that point. But in New York at the time, you really had, the best and the brightest, and that overlay of fashion, art, design, architecture, you had to have, if you wanted to be working in, well, I mean, frankly, most places in the world, you needed a New York office, It was either New York or London. I mean, these were, if you had a New York or London office on your business card as an architect or designer, it's like, okay, you already have credibility, you know what I mean? And that's how it kind of was, at the time. It's certainly not like that now. I mean, things have changed, so
it's
much, and you can, it is very much Dubai now. But, you can work in like Omaha, Nebraska now and still make an impact, with technology and all these things. Nothing to be said about Omaha.
Talking about technology, and let's sort of divert the question to inspiration and working with AI, for example. How do we see that? Do we see that in any way evolving in HA?
Look, I'd be lying if I said I didn't, kind of
you don't use
explore. No. I mean, admittedly, I know nothing about it, and both Stas and I were like, well, it's happening, so we need it, right? So immediately, we're in Midjourney, we're in ChatGPT, we have all the tools. We have loads and loads of tools. How we're currently utilizing those tools and how they're currently being leveraged, jury is still out. I certainly see opportunity for it. I mean, you'd be silly not to see the opportunity in it. I think for us, it's certainly not a subsidy for creativity. We know there are some firms using it as a subsidy for creativity. And there are some major firms, out there being very public, about that, just saying, we're doing this, and this is created from
creating visuals
from Midjourney, and yes, I mean, there might, that's maybe perfectly, okay. I haven't formed, real crystallized opinion of that, but what I certainly see us, using it for is, of course, things like productivity, right? any way that one can automate and, explore more options than, the human minds can allow you to explore. I mean, if you think about it, when you guys sit down as designers and you have a blank sheet of paper, I'm sure you don't fully appreciate this because you'd never get anything done, but there's probably trillions of options, depending on just very small variables and what you're drawing, right? And so,
definitely.
And so what makes one option better than the other, in a kind of measurable, way. And I think, one of our approaches to design, we are very systematic, in how we approach our designs, I have to say, as H was saying.
Define systematic.
Yeah. So healthcare and hospitality, they're core principles, right? They're core elements, right?
Yeah.
You have an array of rooms, you have back of house, you have certain circulation. Healthcare, you have certain code requirements. So let's say there's a lot of parameters to these projects, just kind of, non-negotiable, kind of has to be this way. And once you kind of overlay all of the, we use this term in the office, opportunities and constraints, And so once you overlay all the constraints, where is the opportunity left? Where is the opportunity to create and innovate and do something, special and unique? So we spend most of our times as creatives thinking about opportunities, but the constraints are just there.
And you have to address them.
Yeah, but they're not just there currently, because when we get hired, we have to do it all over again, right? So it's not that we can just take the constraints from one project and implement it to the next. We have to go through the same motions about the adjacencies and there's quite a lot of time, in all of that, only to get to the point that we know in our heads is we're going to get to eventually, but you still have to go through those motions as a team. So, if there was a way that, AI can shortcut, some of these just facts, about the project, and we as creatives can spend, again, our time and the opportunities. It just gives us more bandwidth to focus on innovation, saves money for our clients, frankly, because, we would, well, I don't want to say this on a podcast, but, AI will eventually lead to a change in fee structures and all these types of things if you have, less people or less effort. So there's a lot of things I think that we have to be very mindful of as professionals in this industry, but there's nothing that jumps out at me immediately that I go, that's the change. That's the sea change that is going to just change the shape and form of our offices and change the people we hire. I remember even in the mid 2000s, there was a trend about scripting, right? Using Maya and 3D Studio and all of this. And there were companies that would double down and hire programmers and all this kind of thing. And where are they today? You know what I mean? It hasn't really gone anywhere. I know AI is a different story, but I've seen our industry become very enamored with technology very quickly, and see years for it to still find its way.
I still think that not everything can be changed or exchanged or changed out. I think if you look at design and art or artists, from history, there needs to be the computer. I don't think a computer can do everything,
but computer can organize everything very well.
I think David is really starting to talk a little bit about these points that maybe it will evolve into, that is maybe more organization and trying to organize and structure and do those things. But I still think that they can't create.
You mean the creative part will still remain?
I think so.
Yeah, we'll have a job in the future, guys.
I think this is always the thing, and technology tends to create new jobs. I mean, certainly there are industries affected by jobs, but on the whole, the quantum of jobs, there will be more jobs, as a result of it. And yes, I mean, our roles will just be different. But yes, I mean, I don't see the virtual assistant, robots, AI, doing all the work. Yeah, maybe not such a techno optimist. I'm a techno rationalist, I guess.
So what trends are here to stay? What are the trends you think actually came in our life apart from AI and here to stay in hospitality? And what is slowly disappearing?
Trends in our life. It's hard to say. I mean, I think, and when we're talking about this technology, I spend most of my days trying to go the opposite way. I think the more technology comes in, the more kind of analog I want to be. And this is kind of me personally now, it doesn't reflect necessarily the practice, but I'm very cognizant of my screen time. I'm very conscious now. Like, maybe 10 years ago, I was doing 2 hours a day of mails. Now I'll do 45 minutes a day of mails. You know what I mean? Like some in the morning, some in the afternoons. And just clear up time to do the work that most of our clients expect us to be doing, which is designing their projects and making drawings and, and doing things, right?
I love that.
And so talking about trends moving towards technology and all of this, I arguably think that there will be a reverse current, in a way, just to kind of keep some medium, to all of this, because the moments that we are in this loop, of technology, we're already too far into it, to be perfectly honest. And the moment that we are overboard, when AI is doing a lot of the things for us, I think it's really kind of hard to come out of that. And I think somehow that is maybe a trend as well in how we approach our designs and maybe how, some hotels are, looking at things as well. Hotels used to be, just a nice place to stay and eat, but now hotels are about experiences, right?
Definitely.
So most operators will say they're in the business of creating experiences. And most of these experiences are analog. They're in the real worlds, they're in their food and beverage experiences, their culinary experiences. They are, excursions, they're wellness, right? They're all of these types of things. So I would say this is the biggest trend, or a trend that is kind of emerging, and I think is going to be a kind of counterpoint to this kind of online existence that most of the rest of the world is pushing us towards. But if our hotels and our residential projects can just keep us grounded here on Earth with other humans,
absolutely,
I think that's a kind of, I would welcome that trend to be a staying trend.
Yeah, well, we're with you 100%.
Well, we soon will design at Mars if Elon Musk will decide, I would go. What about sustainability? Is that a trend? Can we say that sustainability is a trend?
No, I think here I am as declaring the end of sustainability as a trend. No, it is no longer a trend. I think now it is very much baked in to one's general approach to projects. And this is not only from a designer's point of view, but it's legislation, right?
And government
and
now.
Yeah, exactly. And this is kind of, I remember talking at conferences 10, 15 years ago on exactly this, in the same way maybe we're talking about wellness now, that okay, how do we convince and how do we do this? And I was very much of the opinion at the time that the only way that we're going to get this done is if government steps in and says you have to do it. It's a mandate. And so now that it is a mandate, to a reasonable level, it is now being followed. But, we, like most, responsible designers, tried to go that one extra step. Simple things like kind of modulating the solid to glass ratio, in our projects. We think glass buildings, although they have a place and time in the world and certainly fit, here in the skyline at times, are a little bit irresponsible, sustainable, in terms of the environment and the engineering systems then required to subsidize what is ultimately a very inefficient, building. So we kind of tried to look at our first principles, of design, efficiency first, I think, as they say in the LEED books when you do your LEED certification, and trying to minimize, to go back to technology, try to minimize.
Are you guys LEED certified?
We were. There's not a lot of reason to be, because now you have so many different, codes, and now you have the local codes, right?
Right. Yeah.
So yes, we try not to rely too much on technology to be sustainable for us, meaning we design whatever we want, we give it to our engineers and go, make it net zero. Doesn't work that way, right? But you'll be surprised how many people try that approach, but it tends not to work. So we like to be sensible in our design approach.
From the very beginning,
our material selections, and we do what we can. We're not doing any net zero. There's still, even though sustainability is here and clients are very much aware of it, and there is legislation, there's still not a huge amount of incentive, particularly for developers here, to do things like carbon neutral, buildings, because we still don't have the kind of economics around how the developers can benefit, from that kind of sorted out here. Whereas other parts of the world where there's tax jurisdictions and all of this, you you have ways to incentivize the developers for kind of feeding back into the grid, but here, not so much.
Not yet.
Yeah.
So in the end of each episode, we usually ask a guest question from our previous guest. And the question was, if you were to own one piece of iconic furniture, what would that be?
Can I have it already?
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I think, without answering the question so simply, to start, one has to first understand that my home or our home, our family home, is a minimalist sanctuary. Okay.
Is it?
Yes. Very much devoid of clutter. Very much still focusing on the essentials. Yes. So we, most designers I know, grow an affinity for collecting furniture and collecting art and these kind of artifacts, along your journey. I am not personally one of those. But there were two pieces of furniture that I always aspired to own, and they're very, I would suppose, stereotypical, answers of an architect, but the Eames lounge chair.
Oh, I knew it. I knew it. I wanted to guess.
And so even though we have this kind of minimalist, sanctuary, I do have my little corner, my library, my lounge chair. There's a TV there as well, of course. Weekends Formula One, but most nights reading, and that I would say there was a lot of joy in acquiring that piece,
yeah,
because it's a very aspirational piece, to own for most. I was very fortunate to be invited to the Vitra campus, and
beautiful space.
and I had the whole experience about making the chair to order. On the campus, right? So, it kind of added, I think, to, just the kind of, the whole experience, around it. It wasn't just ordering a chair online when you had enough money for it, but it was something you aspired to.
It's special.
You saved for, you went to the place, you spec'd it. Of course, I spec'd it to the standard, spec. I didn't do anything special, the classic, but, and that's it. I think, furniture pieces, especially for designers, but even non-designers, you can have a very emotional attachment,
definitely,
to these things, and you tend to remember the moments in your life, because they also, I think, a lot of furniture acquisitions kind of happen around significant moments. Maybe you come into some surplus cash as a designer and you buy a special piece, or you're moving in with someone, or you're growing a family, and all these types of things.
Absolutely.
So I would say, it's not so much about the piece itself, but somehow the memory around it.
Amazing.
100%. I agree with you.
So that was a question for you. We would love to see if you have a question for our next guest.
Oof.
It's pretty much anything you want to ask.
Okay. So is it someone with their own office, or
we don't know?
Yeah, we don't know yet.
What's next after Dubai?
Oh, that's a wow. That's an interesting question.
And I guess it would have to be, obviously, if it's a kind of Emirati that's here for life, you wouldn't say that. But, if it's someone like ourselves, I have no plan, for example. I wouldn't know how to.
I'm going to be in Dubai.
You mean what's next after Dubai for that specific person?
For that specific person, yeah. Or what's the plan, beyond, to Dubai? Second office, or, I don't know.
All of these questions that comes up in the podcast, I always ask them to myself, and I try to...
Definitely, same with me, because there are so many, this is off the record, but there were so many interesting questions, like, what would you want to design? And you're like, oh my God, really? What is it that I would like to do refurbishment of a project, or pieces that I love in my home?
I would have liked that question, because for me, I drive by the Trade Center, and every time I look at the Trade Center tower, I want to make it a hotel. It's just crying out to be like an Edition hotel, isn't it? Like the catacomb Trade Center tower,
Well, someone might hear you, and who knows, you might get a phone call.
There is an Edition hotel not far away from it, so...
Yeah.
David,
thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Even though it was late at night and I was very worried to do it, I had a lot of fun.
Look, it was a pleasure having you here. You're
Definitely.
a very, very interesting character.
I could talk so many more hours with David.
I knew that before, but now we really went into depth, and I knew that before, but now we went into depth, and you know, I can't wait for the next dinner.
For the next dinner,
even more.
Yes,
we know where it's gonna be.
We'll continue a lot of these conversations. Yeah, in a different
I would
setting.
love to see your minimalistic house as well, because I'm a very minimalist myself as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
David.
you so much, David.
Thank you.